Hi, I am Marina Webster, your host for Inspiring Author TV, the only show that inspires authors to write and gives you tips and hints on how to publish, market, and promote your books. And today we have an Australian writer, Western Australian writer and poet, Andrew Lansdown. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
Andrew is a published author of many poetry books, novels, and short stories books. So, Andrew, can you tell us about your books and what was the inspiration for you to write your books in the first place?
I began writing poetry. That was where I started, and I began writing that in large part because when I was around 16, I heard a fellow around my age read a poem that he had written, and I was so impressed by that, I thought I'd like to be able to write poems as well. And so I began writing what I thought was poetry, and then after a year or so, I guess I had enough nous to realise that it wasn't particularly good because I didn't really know anything about poetry. So I left work, and I was working as a clerk at the time. I went back to school, to Leadville Technical College, and there I had a marvellous English literature teacher.
Right.
And he took an interest in my poetry. He also got the class to analyse poetry, and so I began to learn how poetry was working and began to apply that back into my own work. In fact, Peter Good is the name of the man, and he painted this cover of this book of mine, Birds in Mind. He was a painter as well.
Right. So it is how you started to write poetry. What about novels?
Well, it was Peter who suggested I should try writing some short stories. So I began writing short stories and began to have some of those published in the literary magazines. And then I wrote a fantasy story called With My Knife. And this novel is based on that story, or grows out of that story. It was a short story of only 1,500 words, and the ABC and the BBC broadcast it as a short story. And I was so taken with it that I thought, well, I think I can do something more with it. And so I took that as a foundation and wrote that novel With My Knife. And then I had a lot of ideas over after writing With My Knife, so I wrote this one, Dragon Fox, and I had ideas over from that, and wrote this one, The Red Dragon. So With My Knife, Dragon Fox, and The Red Dragon form a trilogy which Scholastic Australia published.
Right. And do you have any system of getting the ideas for your books, or they just come to you?
I'm not exactly sure how to say where I get the ideas from. I suppose with poetry, it's really anything that you might see or experience. I have a notebook with me all the time. I jot down ideas and images, and then later on I might come back to those and work on them. Yeah, I suppose it's just everyday experiences and wanting to write about things that I love or things that concern me, things that interest me.
And keeping your notebook all the time
Yes,
with you and just write down everything you observe around.
If you don't write things down, you forget them, and
That's
then
right.
and then they're lost. So far as being able to do anything with them for writing purposes.
Yeah, good tip for every author. So, Andrew, how did you publish your books?
All of my books have been published through various publishing houses. I think when I began writing and first publishing, well, to begin with, I didn't know you could get books published, and a local press in Western Australia, Fremantle Arts Centre Press, which is now called Fremantle Press, they I don't know how I learnt of this, but I learnt that they were wanting to start a new series of poetry books, just 30 pages, and the series was called Shoreline, or Shorelines, and so I submitted a collection of poems to Fremantle Arts Centre Press. I had probably about 70 poems published in literary journals by that stage. So I put those together, sent it off, and then they selected the 30-odd poems out of that.
Yeah, so can you call yourself lucky in this respect that you submitted your work and it was accepted?
Yes, I think lucky is one way of saying it. I think too that you know, hopefully the quality of the work was what they were looking for, and a number of the poets that were published in that series, the same series that I was published in, have, you know, gone on to publish other works and win various prizes and things like that. So all of my books I've submitted to different publishing houses, just with a little cover letter saying, look, enclosed is a collection of poems titled such and such that I'm offering for your consideration for publication. Included a self-addressed envelope with the appropriate postage, and then send it off and wait and see what's happened. And very often the books have been taken. When they haven't been taken, I've reconsidered them, maybe done a bit more work on them, and then simply submitted them to another publishing house. And generally have been taken then.
Yeah, just I want to clarify here. So when you want your book to get published, so you submit this book to many publishing houses?
No, I
just
usually just submit it to the one publishing
one
house.
But what if they reject it?
Well, if they reject it, then
you submit
I'll
another
do.
one.
Yeah, well, to that publishing house, I just leave them alone for the moment. But with the book that they've rejected, the manuscript they've rejected, I'll do a little bit of looking over that to see if I can see weaknesses, which may be the reason why they've rejected it. And
Do they tell you why? No?
generally not. Occasionally they give you some feedback, but generally they just say, you know, thank you very much, but it's not suitable for our publishing program, or they might say, you know, we've had 60 poetry manuscripts and we're only publishing 2 collections this year, and we've already got those 2 selected. So what I do with the manuscript then is look over it again, and then I'll send it off to another publishing house. But of course I've looked at the publishing houses to see what sort of thing they publish. So obviously I don't send a collection of poetry to a publishing house that doesn't publish poetry. So I look at the sorts of things that they're publishing and think, well, you know, maybe what I'm doing will fit in with what they are, you know, focusing on.
Right.
And so I'll send the manuscript off to the next publisher. I think generally the second time, or certainly third time round, I've had the books taken. So by that stage, that collection or that particular book has been taken, and so then it's for the next manuscript.
Okay. So how many books you published altogether, Andrew?
Look, I think it's 17. And
17
I should have
books, yeah.
counted them up. But,
This is a big number for an author.
It is, although I've been writing for more than 35 years or so now.
Right.
So in that sense, it's probably not a huge number.
Right. Yeah. You're very modest. You're very modest person, Andrew. Right. So it looks like you have wonderful experience in publishing and book writing. What would you recommend to a young author who just start writing and publishing?
Well,
what your recommendation would be?
I guess I'd have 2 recommendations. One is to keep learning as much as you can, and any information you get can be used ultimately somewhere in your writing. The other is to really apply yourself to your craft. So if you're wanting to write stories, read a lot of stories. If they're romance stories you're wanting to write, well, read a lot of romance stories. But so read in the areas that you want to write in, and then as you read, ask yourself, you know, what is the writer saying? Why is he saying it? And how is he saying it? And it's that how is he saying it that you can learn the various techniques and approaches and devices, literary devices that writers use, and you can apply that back into your own writing. And and sort of in the context of that too, I guess in the first instance I never began writing in order to be published. It never occurred to me that I could be published. I wanted to write poetry because I was so impressed by hearing this young fellow, and I suppose I was influenced also, although I'd not read much poetry, I was listening to a lot of traditional and contemporary folk music, so whether it was Steel Eye Span or Bob Dylan or Donovan Leitch, or, and these singers were always putting a focus on the words too, so that probably had some impact on me. But I wasn't really thinking, I write this to be published. And even now, I don't really think that first off. My first thought is, I want to do the best job I can with this poem, this story, this novel that I'm writing. And I think sometimes people get it the wrong way around. They think, how can I be famous? Oh, well, I'll write poems, or I'll do this. And so they're not really, it seems to me, not really in love with the thing that they're writing about, or with the particular form that they are working in. And that seems to me to be a mistake. You know, you want to love the, if you want to write poetry, you want to love poetry, you want to read poetry, you want to know what poetry is, and then you want to write poetry about things that concern you, and your first concern should be this poem. Not a book of poems, but this poem. I want to get this poem right. And then you go on to the next poem, and then I find after I've written and had published in the literary magazines and newspapers, say, you know, 80, 90, 100 poems, that's when I begin to think, right, now I'll put them together as a collection and see what publisher might bring it out as a book.
Yeah, so your main recommendation basically practice, 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 and love what you do.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so Andrew, where people can buy your books?
Well, they can get them from the publishers. So this book, All Sorts, is a collection of children's poems. Far From Home is a collection of poems for adults and Birds in Mind. They are all available from Wombat Books. We published those. The three novels, they are available from Scholastic, and they can be got also from bookshops and so on. All of these books can be got in by the bookshop, but they usually, many of them wouldn't be sitting on the shelves. But also they can get them from my website, andrewlansdown.com, and they can download an order form and send an order through to me if they're wanting to get them.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Andrew. I think it was a very informative interview today, and I certainly learned a lot, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you.